The tapestry seemed to shimmer in the lamplight as Josephine's fingers worked the loom with practiced precision. Her dreams taking shape in threads of gold and crimson that depicted a lone rider beneath a desert sky so vivid it nearly breathed. She had been weaving for 6 hours straight in the cramped back room of her boarding house in Tucson, Arizona Territory, this year of 1878, and her back ached something fierce. But she could not stop when the visions came to her so clearly in sleep and demanded to be born into fabric and color. The boarding house matron, Mrs. Carmichael, had thought Josephine mad when she first arrived 3 months prior, carrying nothing but her precious loom strapped to a mule and a canvas bag of colored threads she had spent 2 years collecting. Most women who came to Tucson were running from something or running toward a husband. But Josephine Rivers, 22 years old and flame-haired with green eyes that shifted like desert sage, had come because the dreams told her this was where her destiny waited. She stepped back from the loom, wiping sweat from her brow despite the evening cool that seeped through the adobe walls. The tapestry showed a man on horseback, his hat pulled low against a sandstorm, one hand raised as if reaching for something just beyond the frame. His face remained unclear in her mind, always just out of focus when she dreamed, but she knew the set of his shoulders, the way he sat his horse like he had been born in the saddle, the strength in that reaching hand. "You are still at it, child, Mrs. Carmichael appeared in the doorway with a tray bearing bread and weak coffee. "You will work yourself to death over these strange pictures." "They are not strange," Josephine said, accepting the food gratefully. "They are true. Somewhere, somehow." The older woman shook her head but smiled with affection. "You artists are all touched by the sun, but I suppose your work sells well enough at the mercantile. Mr. Peterson says folks come from as far as Phoenix to see your tapestries. Says he has never seen anything like them." That much was true. Josephine had been shocked when her first piece, a simple scene of mustangs running through canyon lands, had sold for $20 within a day of being displayed. The buyer, a railroad man from back east, had stared at it for a full 10 minutes before declaring he had dreamed of those exact horses as a boy. Since then, she had sold 7 more tapestries, each one drawn from her vivid dreams, each one seeming to strike a chord of recognition in whoever ended up purchasing them. But this one, this tapestry of the reaching cowboy, she could not bring herself to sell. She had started it 4 times, unraveling the threads each time something felt wrong, beginning again until the image matched the dream precisely. Something told her this one mattered more than all the others. The following morning, Josephine carried the tapestry to Peterson's mercantile anyway, thinking perhaps she needed to see it in different light to understand what the dream meant. The mercantile occupied a prime corner on Mayor Street, its windows recently upgraded to real glass that made everything inside visible to passers-by. She had barely finished hanging the tapestry on the display wall when a commotion outside drew Mr. Peterson to the door. "Well, I will be damned," the shopkeeper breathed. "That is Dalton Lawson." Josephine looked up from arranging the tapestry's corners. Through the window, she watched a tall man dismount from a dusty paint horse, his movements economical and fluid despite obvious exhaustion. He wore canvas pants, a faded blue shirt, and a black hat that had seen better days. Even from this distance, even through glass and dust motes, something about his silhouette made her heart lurch strangely in her chest. "Who is Dalton Lawson?" she asked, unable to look away as the man tied his horse to the rail and stretched, his hand rising to push back his hat in a gesture that seemed suddenly, impossibly familiar. "Cattle driver, mostly," Mr. Peterson said with clear admiration. "One of the best." He has been up the Kishome Trail more times than most men have been to church. Heard he was down in Mexico the past 6 months, helping some rancher fight off rustlers. Man is a legend, though he cannot be more than 26 or 27 years old. The cowboy turned toward the mercantile, and Josephine felt the world tilt sideways. His face, weathered by sun and wind, strong-jawed with eyes the color of storm clouds, was the face she had been trying to capture in thread for 3 months. Not exactly, not perfectly, but close enough that her breath caught in her throat. He walked through the door, bringing the smell of horse and leather and desert wind with him. His gaze swept the mercantile with practiced assessment, catching on the new shipment of rifle ammunition, the fresh produce Mrs. Peterson had arranged that morning, the bolts of fabric in the corner. Then his eyes found the tapestry, and he stopped dead in his tracks. Josephine watched the color drain from his face beneath the tan. He crossed the space between door and wall in 4 long strides, standing so close to the tapestry she could hear his breathing change. Where did this come from? His voice was rough, like he had not used it much recently, but it carried a quality that made something in her chest resonate like a struck bell. Mr. Peterson gestured to Josephine. Miss Rivers here is the artist, creates them from her dreams, or so she claims. Amazing work, is it not? Dalton turned to look at her fully for the first time, and the impact of his direct gaze nearly made her step backward. Those storm-gray eyes held hers with an intensity that should have been frightening, but instead felt like recognition, like memory, like coming home to a place she had never been. "You dreamed this?" he asked, and she heard the tremor beneath the rough exterior. "Yes," she said, lifting her chin though her hands wanted to shake. "I dream many things. I weave what I see." He looked back at the tapestry, and she saw his throat work as he swallowed. "I know this moment. This exact moment. It happened 3 weeks ago, south of here near the border. There was a dust storm, bad one, and I got separated from the rancher I was working for. I saw something in that storm, riding ahead of me through the sand, and I reached out like this." He lifted his hand in the gesture she had woven into the cloth, trying to catch it. "Thought I was sun-addled, seeing spirits or some such, but you captured it exactly as it was." The mercantile had gone silent. Mrs. Peterson had emerged from the back room, and 2 other customers had paused in their browsing to listen. Josephine felt their stares but could not look away from Dalton's face, from the wonder and confusion and something else, something deeper, that moved behind his eyes. "I do not understand how this works," she admitted quietly. "I have been having these dreams since I was 16. They show me places I have never been, people I have never met. When I weave them, people tell me they recognize the scenes, that they have lived them or witnessed them. But I have never met someone who was actually in the tapestry before, never like this." Dalton reached out slowly as if asking permission, and when she did not stop him, he touched the woven fabric with calloused fingertips. "It even has the tear in my shirt sleeve. See here. Caught it on barbed wire 2 days before the storm. How could you possibly know that?" "I do not know," Josephine said, and realized her voice was shaking now. "I just see it and I weave it." He pulled his hand back, seemed to gather himself with visible effort. "I am sorry, miss. I have startled you. It is just seeing yourself rendered in thread like this, a moment you thought was private and half imagined. It shakes a man." He looked at her again, and this time something softer moved in his expression. "You are very talented, more than talented. There is something else at work here." "Magic," Mrs. Peterson whispered, then crossed herself quickly. "Or fate," Dalton said quietly, still holding Josephine's gaze. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "Well, Mr. Lawson, can we help you with supplies today?" It took visible effort for Dalton to turn away from the tapestry and conduct his business. He needed ammunition, coffee, dried beef, and a new saddle blanket. While Mr. Peterson assembled the order, Dalton kept glancing back at the tapestry, then at Josephine, as if trying to solve an equation that would not balance. Josephine pretended to arrange other pieces on display, but her hands trembled, and she had to set down a small woven panel twice before getting it straight. The other customers completed their purchases and left, casting curious glances between her and the tall cowboy. Mrs. Peterson whispered something to her husband that Josephine could not quite hear. Finally, with his supplies bundled and paid for, Dalton approached her directly. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into sun and distance, a small scar on his chin, the surprising fullness of his lower lip. He smelled of sage and leather and something underneath that was just him, just his skin and warmth. "Miss Rivers," he said, and her name in his rough voice did strange things to her pulse. "Would you consider selling me that tapestry?" She had known he would ask. Had known from the moment she saw his face that this piece was his, had always been his. But hearing the request made it real in a way that frightened her. "I do not think I can," she said slowly. "Not yet. I still do not understand what it means." "I am in it," he pointed out reasonably. "Maybe I could help you understand." That was logical, sensible even. But something in her resisted. "You are in it, but you are reaching for something. I do not know what yet. The dream is not complete." Interest sharpened his features. "You mean you have dreamed of me more than once?" Heat flooded her cheeks. Put that way, it sounded intimate in a manner she had not intended. "I dream of many people multiple times. There is usually a sequence, a story, but I have only woven this one piece of yours. There is more to come, I think." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an attention that should have been uncomfortable but somehow was not. "When will you dream again?" "I do not control it. Sometimes every night for weeks, sometimes not for months. Will you tell me when you dream of me again?" The request was bold, almost presumptuous, but his voice held a note of genuine need that made it acceptable. She should say no. Should maintain proper distance from this stranger, legendary cowboy or not. But her dreams had never steered her wrong before, and every instinct she possessed was singing that this man, this Dalton Lawson, was important beyond measure. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I will tell you." Relief washed over his face, so pure and unguarded that it transformed him from intimidating to almost vulnerable. "I am staying at the Cattleman's Hotel on Pennington Street, room 12, or you can leave word there. I will be in Tucson for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer depending on some business I need to settle." "All right." He hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, then seemed to think better of it. With a last long look at the tapestry, he touched the brim of his hat in farewell and collected his supplies. She watched through the window as he loaded his saddlebags, mounted his paint horse with the ease of long practice, and rode down the dusty street toward the hotel. "Well," Mr. Peterson said into the silence Dalton left behind, "that was the most peculiar interaction I have witnessed in 20 years of running this establishment." "He seemed quite taken with our weaver," Mrs. Peterson added with poorly concealed delight. "Did you see how he looked at her?" "The tapestry," Josephine corrected weakly. "He was taken with the tapestry." "Oh, he looked at the tapestry, certainly, but he looked at you quite differently, dear, quite differently indeed." Josephine busied herself with straightening displays that needed no straightening, but her mind was far from the mercantile. She was thinking of storm-gray eyes and calloused fingers on woven cloth, of a voice that resonated in her bones, of the way her heart had recognized him before her mind caught up. That night, she dreamed again. The vision came in vivid detail, almost overwhelming in its clarity. She saw Dalton riding through canyon country, the red rock walls rising on either side like ancient sentinels. He was tracking something, his attention focused on the ground, on signs she could not quite decipher. Then danger, sudden and sharp, a rifle shot echoing off stone, his horse rearing. She saw him dive from the saddle, saw him take cover behind a boulder, saw him return fire with calm precision. But that was not the important part. The important part came after, when the shooting stopped, and he emerged from cover to find not bandits or rustlers but a young Apache boy, no more than 12, who had been shooting at a rattlesnake and had not seen the rider approaching. The boy's terror was palpable, but Dalton lowered his gun, spoke words she could not hear but whose tone was gentle, reassuring. He helped the boy kill the snake, shared water from his canteen, pointed the child back toward what must have been his home. The dream shifted, and she saw Dalton making camp as sunset painted the canyon walls in shades of rose and gold. He sat by his fire, and his expression was unutterably lonely. He was looking at something in his hands, turning it over and over. She could not see what it was, but the longing on his face pierced her heart. Then, in the way of dreams, he looked up and seemed to see her watching. His eyes widened with recognition and something else, something tender and wondering. He stood, took a step toward her, reached out his hand just as he had in the dust storm. This time she reached back. Their fingers touched across the impossible distance between dream and waking, and the sensation burned through her like lightning, like whiskey, like the first breath after drowning. She felt him, truly felt him, the warmth of his skin, the strength in his hand, the calluses from years of rope and reins. She felt his shock mirror her own, felt his grip tighten as if to keep her from disappearing. Then she woke, gasping in her small room in the boarding house, her hand still outstretched toward empty air. Dawn was just breaking, painting her window in shades of pearl and pink. Josephine lay in bed, her heart hammering, her hand tingling where dream fingers had clasped her own. She had never, in 10 years of prophetic dreaming, been part of the vision before, had never been seen, never been touched. What did it mean? She rose and dressed with shaking hands, chose a simple calico dress in green that Mrs. Carmichael insisted brought out her eyes. She braided her long red hair, pinned it up, then took it down and re-braided it twice before accepting that she was being ridiculous. She was going to tell a man about a dream, nothing more, except it felt like everything more. The Cattleman's Hotel was a respectable establishment, catering primarily to ranchers and cattle buyers who needed clean beds and decent food while conducting business in Tucson. The lobby smelled of coffee and bacon, and the clerk at the desk looked at her with polite curiosity when she asked if Mr. Lawson was available. "I believe he is at breakfast, miss. Shall I fetch him, please?" She waited, studying the paintings of cattle herds that decorated the walls, the potted cactus in the corner, the worn but clean furniture. Her palms were sweating. She wiped them on her skirt and immediately felt foolish for doing so. Then Dalton appeared from the dining room, and the sight of him made her breath catch all over again. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his hair still damp from washing, his shirt a fresh white that set off his tan. His eyes found hers immediately, and the impact of that gaze in the morning light was even more potent than it had been in the mercantile. "Miss Rivers," he said, crossing to her quickly. "Has something happened? Are you all right?" The concern in his voice warmed her. "I am fine. I dreamed again." "Last night, of you?" His expression shifted through several emotions too quickly to name before settling on intense focus. "Will you tell me?" "Yes, but perhaps not here." She glanced at the clerk, who was clearly listening with interest, Of course. There is a courtyard out back, private. Would that be acceptable? She nodded. And he led her through the hotel to a small garden area with a few benches and a struggling cottonwood tree. The morning air was still cool, pleasant before the day's heat settled in. They sat on a bench, carefully maintaining proper distance between them, though she was acutely aware of every inch that separated them. Josephine told him the dream, describing the canyon, the accidental shooting, the Apache boy, his campfire at sunset. She did not mention the loneliness she had seen on his face, that felt too intimate, too much like seeing inside his soul without permission. And she did not mention the moment when he had seen her, when they had touched across impossible distances. That felt too strange, too private, though her hand still tingled with the memory. Dalton listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "I am supposed to ride out tomorrow," he said finally. "Head up to Canyon de Chelly, deliver a message to a rancher up that way. What you described, that is Canyon de Chelly country exactly. The red rock walls, the way the sunset hits them." "So you have not lived this yet," Josephine said slowly. "This is yet to come, appears so." He looked at her then, and she saw fear in his eyes, quickly masked but unmistakable. "The shooting, do I get hurt?" "No, I do not think so. You move quickly, and it ends peacefully with the boy." Relief softened his features. "That is something at least." "But there is more," Josephine said, unable to stop herself. "There is something else coming, something I have not seen yet." The dream felt incomplete, unfinished. He studied her with that intense focus that made her feel simultaneously exposed and safe. "You have a gift, Miss Rivers, a true one. I do not pretend to understand it, but I know it is real, and I find myself very grateful that your dreams include me, even if I do not know why. I think," she said carefully, "that you are important, that you are meant to be important. The dreams usually show me things that matter, things that need to happen or that will change something. I have never quite understood the purpose, but there is always a reason." Important to what? To whom? She could not say it. Could not voice the thought that had been growing in her mind since she first saw him in the mercantile. "Important to me. I do not know yet." He accepted this with a slow nod. "Will you weave this new dream?" "Yes, I have to. It is the only way to make sense of them sometimes." "May I watch?" The request surprised her. "Watch me weave." I have never seen anyone work a loom, and if I am going to be rendered in thread again, I confess I am curious about the process. He smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. The stern cowboy became someone younger, more open, almost boyish in his enthusiasm. "I suppose that would be all right," she said, though her heart was hammering at the thought of him in her small room, watching her work, those gray eyes following the movement of her hands. "I work in the boarding house on 3rd Street. Mrs. Carmichael's establishment. I know it. Respectable place. Very. Mrs. Carmichael would allow you in the parlor, perhaps, though having you in my room would not be proper. The parlor would be fine." They arranged that he would come by that evening after his business in town was concluded. When Josephine returned to the boarding house, she found Mrs. Carmichael in rare form, interrogating her about the handsome cowboy who was apparently the talk of Tucson this morning after his dramatic reaction to the tapestry. "He is just interested in the weaving," Josephine protested, though the knowing look Mrs. Carmichael gave her suggested the older woman was not fooled. "A man like that does not come calling about weaving, child, but I approve, I must say. Dalton Lawson has a good reputation. Honest, hardworking, does not drink or gamble over much. You could do far worse. He is not calling. He is visiting. There is a difference. But that evening, when Dalton arrived at the boarding house precisely at 7 with his hat in his hands and a bouquet of desert marigolds he had clearly picked himself, it felt very much like calling. Mrs. Carmichael ushered him into the parlor with barely concealed delight, and made herself scarce in a way that still allowed her to chaperone from the kitchen doorway. Josephine had set up her smaller traveling loom, the one she used for detail work, and had already begun the process of threading it with the colors she needed. Dalton settled into a chair she indicated and watched in silence as she worked, his attention absolute. There was something surprisingly intimate about being watched while she created. Usually she worked alone, lost in the meditative rhythm of the loom, but having him there made her hyper-aware of every movement, every choice of color and pattern. His presence should have been distracting, but instead it seemed to focus her, as if her dreams and her waking life were finally aligned. "You do not use a pattern," he observed after a while. "No, I work from memory, from the dream. It is all here." She tapped her temple. "Remarkable." They fell into comfortable silence, broken only by the rhythmic sounds of her weaving and the occasional creak of his chair as he shifted position. Outside, the evening sounds of Tucson drifted through the open window. Dogs barking, children called home for supper, horses and wagons on the street. "May I ask you something?" Dalton said eventually. "Of course." "Why did you come to Tucson? You said you have been here 3 months. What brought you to the territory?" Josephine paused in her work, considering how much to reveal. "The dreams brought me. I was living in Santa Fe with my aunt after my parents died of fever when I was 17. I worked in her dressmaking shop, used her loom to create my tapestries. But about 6 months ago, I started dreaming of Tucson specifically. Of this place, these streets, the desert around it. And I knew I had to come. That must have taken courage, to follow dreams to an unknown place, or foolishness." She smiled slightly. "My aunt thought I was mad. We argued terribly before I left. She has not written since. I am sorry for that. I am not truly. I could not ignore what the dreams were telling me. And now, being here, meeting you, seeing you in the tapestry, I think I understand why I was called." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Dalton leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his expression serious. "Miss Rivers, Josephine, please." Josephine. Her name in his mouth was a revelation. "I need you to understand something. I am not a settled man. I have been on the move since I was 16 years old when I left my father's failing farm in Missouri. I have seen more of this country than most men twice my age. I have driven cattle from Texas to Kansas, worked ranches from Montana to Mexico, lived rough and dangerous for more than 10 years. I do not have a home, barely have possessions beyond what my horse can carry. I am not the kind of man a woman builds a life with." She heard what he was saying, but she also heard what he was not saying. The longing beneath the warning, the hope he was trying to suppress. She set down her shuttle and looked at him directly. "Did I ask you to build a life with me?" He blinked, clearly surprised. "No, but I felt you should know. Before whatever this is goes any further." "What this is," Josephine said carefully, "is 2 people trying to understand something strange and possibly magical. I dreamed of you before I met you. You appeared in my tapestry before you walked into that mercantile. There is a reason for that. I am certain of it, but I do not presume to know what it means for tomorrow or next week or next year. Can we not simply see where this leads without declaring our unworthiness or unsuitability?" A slow smile spread across his face. "You are not like most women I have met." "I would hope not, given that I am invaded nightly by prophetic dreams and spend my days weaving them into cloth." He laughed, a real laugh that lit his entire face and made her heart skip. "Fair point. All right then. We will see where this leads." They continued in this fashion for the next 3 evenings. Dalton would finish his daily business and come to the boarding house, where Josephine would work on the new tapestry while they talked. She learned that he had a sister back in Missouri, married now with children he had never met. That his father had died bitter and broken, and Dalton had fled rather than share that fate. That he loved the open spaces, the work of cattle driving, the simplicity of a life lived under sky with a good horse beneath him. In turn, she told him of her childhood in Santa Fe, of discovering her gift at 16 when she dreamed of her father's death 3 days before it happened, of the isolation that came from being different, from seeing things others could not, of the solace she found in weaving, in giving form to the formless visions that haunted her sleep. On the 3rd evening, the tapestry was nearly complete. She worked the final details of the canyon walls, the play of sunset light on stone, the Apache boy's face as Dalton knelt beside him. Her hands moved with sure confidence, but inside her heart was in turmoil. Because tomorrow Dalton would ride out to Canyon de Chelly, and the dream would become real, and she had no idea what came after. "Are you worried?" she asked quietly. "About tomorrow?" He was silent for a moment. "Not worried exactly, but it is strange knowing what will happen. Takes away some of the mystery from life. I could stop telling you the dreams." "No." His response was immediate, almost sharp. "No, I want to know. I have just never had this kind of certainty before. Always I have ridden into unknown situations, ready for anything. This is different." "The dream showed you safe," she reminded him. "You help the boy, you make camp, you survive." "Yes." He stood then, crossing to where she sat at the loom. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the leather and sage scent that was becoming wonderfully familiar. "But the dream did not show what I do after. Whether I ride back to Tucson or continue north or head off in some other direction entirely." She looked up at him, her hand stilling on the thread. "What do you want to do?" His eyes held hers, storm gray and intense and full of things she was only beginning to understand. "I want to ride back to Tucson, to you, but I do not know if I have that right, if I am what your dreams intend." Josephine set down her shuttle with deliberate care and stood to face him properly. They were close now, closer than propriety strictly allowed, but Mrs. Carmichael had fallen asleep in her chair by the kitchen, and there was no one to see or object. "Dalton," she said, and saw him react to the sound of his name from her lips. "I do not think the dreams intend anything specific. I think they show possibilities, pathways. The choices are still ours." "Then I choose to come back," he said quietly. "If you will have me, I will have you." The words were simple, but they hung in the air like a vow, like a promise that changed everything. Dalton reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her braid behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and she found herself leaning into the touch without conscious thought. "I have never been a man who believes in fate," he murmured. "Always figured we make our own way, that life is what we decide to do with it. But meeting you, seeing myself in your weaving, hearing you describe dreams that come true, it shakes everything I thought I knew." "I know," she whispered. "It shakes me too." They stood like that for a long moment, connected by his hand on her face, by the space between them that seemed charged with possibility. Then Mrs. Carmichael snorted in her sleep, and the spell broke gently. Dalton stepped back, his hand falling away, though his eyes never left her face. "I should go. Early start tomorrow. Be careful." "I will. And Josephine, when I come back, I mean to court you properly, with your permission." Joy bloomed in her chest like desert flowers after rain. "You have my permission." He left with a last lingering look, and she watched from the window as he walked back toward his hotel, his tall figure disappearing into the Tucson night. Mrs. Carmichael woke with a start and immediately wanted to know what had transpired, but Josephine just smiled and returned to her loom, weaving the final threads of the vision that had brought them together. The next day dragged interminably. Josephine tried to work on other pieces, on the commissions Mr. Peterson had waiting, but her mind was miles away in Red Rock canyons. She imagined Dalton encountering the boy, imagined the rifle shots echoing off stone, imagined him safe and whole as the dream had promised. But what if the dream was wrong? What if her visions, for the first time, had misled her? By evening, she was nearly frantic with worry, though she tried to hide it from Mrs. Carmichael. She picked at her dinner, jumped at every sound from the street, found herself repeatedly going to the window to look for a rider who could not possibly be back yet. "Child, you will worry yourself sick," Mrs. Carmichael said gently. "He is a capable man, he will be fine." "I know. What if I missed something in the dream? What if there was more I should have told him? Then he will handle it, as he has handled everything else that has come his way. You must have faith in him and in your gift." Josephine tried to take comfort in these words, but sleep evaded her that night. She lay in bed, reaching for dreams that would not come, seeing nothing but darkness where visions usually flickered. The silence from her gift was somehow worse than any nightmare could have been. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to dawn light and the sound of a horse in the street below. She rushed to the window, her heart in her throat, and saw Dalton dismounting from his paint horse. He was dusty, clearly tired, but whole and unhurt. And he was back a full day earlier than he should have been. She threw on a wrapper over her nightgown and hurried downstairs, propriety forgotten in her relief. She burst through the front door just as he was tying his horse to the rail, and he turned at the sound, his face breaking into a smile. "You are back," she gasped. "You are safe." "I am." He took a step toward her, then seemed to remember where they were, who might be watching. "Everything happened exactly as you dreamed it. The canyon, the boy, the gunfire, all of it. I made camp where you showed me, watched the sunset paint the rocks red and gold. And then I turned around and rode through the night to get back here." Why? But she thought she knew, hoped she knew. He closed the distance between them, heedless now of any watching eyes. "Because I could not stand to be away from you a moment longer than necessary. Because somewhere between seeing myself in your tapestry and watching you weave my life into thread, I started falling for you, Josephine Rivers. And I do not care if it is too soon or too fast or too strange. It is true." Her heart felt too big for her chest, too full of sudden overwhelming joy. "I have been falling for you too, since before I met you, I think, since the first time I dreamed your face." This time, when he reached for her, he pulled her into his arms, held her close against his chest where she could hear his heart hammering in time with her own. She wrapped her arms around his waist and held on, breathing in the scent of him, feeling the solid reality of his body against hers. "I do not have much to offer you," he murmured into her hair, "but what I have is yours, my heart, my protection, whatever future we can build together." "That is everything," she said against his shirt. "That is all I need." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the early morning light while Tucson slowly woke around them. Finally, Dalton pulled back enough to look at her face, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. "There is something I need to tell you," he said. "Something that happened at the canyon after the dream ended." "What?" "I was sitting by my fire, thinking about you, wishing you were there to see the sunset, and I felt something. Like you were there watching, even though I could not see you, and then for just a second I did see you. Your face, your hand reaching toward me. I thought I had finally lost my mind to sun and solitude, but you felt real. Were you there? In some way, Josephine's pulse quickened. I reached for you in the dream, at the end when you were alone by the fire. I reached for you and I thought I felt you reach back. Wonder transformed his expression. So it was real. We touched across whatever distance separates dreams from waking. I do not understand how. Does it matter? Maybe we are bound together in ways neither of us comprehends. Maybe the dreams are not just showing me to you, but connecting us on some deeper level. He cupped her face in both hands, his calloused thumbs stroking her cheekbones. All I know is that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. Like you are the missing piece I did not know I was searching for. She rose on her toes and kissed him then, unable to resist another moment. His lips were warm and slightly chapped from wind and sun, and the kiss was tender and wondering and full of promise. He made a small sound of surprise that became something deeper, pulling her closer as the kiss intensified. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Mrs. Carmichael was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed and a smile on her face. "Well," the older woman said, "I suppose congratulations are in order, but perhaps the two of you should come inside before you give the entire street a show." They did, and over breakfast Dalton formally asked Mrs. Carmichael's permission to court Josephine. The matron gave it gladly, launching into a detailed description of what proper courtship entailed, and how often he would be allowed to visit and always with a chaperone present, until such time as engagements or marriages were announced. "Marriage," Josephine said faintly. "We have known each other less than a week." "Time is not always the measure of certainty," Dalton said, taking her hand across the table. "But we will do this right. Court you properly, give you time to be sure." "I am already sure," she said, then blushed at her own boldness. His smile was brilliant. "Still, we will do this right." And they did. For the next 3 months, Dalton courted Josephine with a patience and devotion that made her fall more in love with him every day. He took her riding in the desert, showing her the places he had worked and traveled. He brought her little gifts, a perfect piece of turquoise, a bird's nest fallen intact from a tree, a book of poetry from the mercantile. He sat with her while she wove, telling her stories of his travels, listening to her describe the dreams that still came, though none featured him again. He took a job working for a local rancher, breaking horses and mending fences, work that kept him near Tucson instead of on the trail. He found a small house to rent on the edge of town, fixing it up with his own hands, and though he never said so explicitly, she knew he was building a home for them, for the future he hoped they would share. The town quickly accepted them as a couple. They attended church socials and barn dances, always properly chaperoned by Mrs. Carmichael or the rancher's wife. They walked the plaza in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, their connection deepening from attraction into true partnership. Josephine's Tapestries continued to sell, her reputation growing beyond Tucson. A gallery owner from San Francisco saw her work and wanted to represent her, but she turned him down. Her art was not for galleries. It was for the people who needed to see themselves reflected, who found truth and recognition in her woven dreams. On a warm evening in September, 4 months after they met, Dalton took Josephine to the house he had been preparing. It was modest but solid, 3 rooms and a covered porch with a view of the mountains to the east. He had built her a workspace in the largest room with good light and shelves for her threads. "It is not much," he said, watching her explore, "but it is ours, if you want it, if you will marry me." She turned to find him holding a simple gold band, his expression nervous and hopeful and full of love. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. Then he kissed her with a passion that had been carefully restrained for months, and she kissed him back with all the love and longing she had been holding in check. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church on Main Street, with half of Tucson in attendance. Mrs. Carmichael wept through the entire ceremony. Mr. Peterson gave Josephine away since she had no family present. The rancher Dalton worked for gifted them a young mare to go with Dalton's paint horse. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a slow exploration of each other that felt like the culmination of something that had begun in dreams and visions before they ever met. Lying in Dalton's arms afterward, her head on his chest, Josephine felt complete in a way she never had before. "No dreams tonight," Dalton murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "No dreams. I do not need them anymore. My dream is here, awake, holding me." He kissed her forehead. "I still cannot quite believe you are real, that this is real. Sometimes I think I will wake up and find it was all a vision, that I am still that lonely cowboy camping in canyons with nothing to come home to." "You will always have something to come home to now," she promised. "Me, us, this life we are building." And they did build a life together, day by day, month by month. Dalton continued working for the rancher, proving himself so valuable that within a year he was offered a partnership. He and Josephine used some of her tapestry money to buy into the ranch, and suddenly they were landowners, people of substance in the growing town. Josephine set up her loom in the room Dalton had built for her and continued her work. The dreams came less frequently now, but when they did, they were vivid and true as always. She wove them and sold them through Mr. Peterson's mercantile, and people came from across the territory to see the prophetic tapestries of the woman who wove truth into thread. But she never again dreamed of Dalton, and she understood why. He was no longer a vision to be pursued, a mystery to be solved. He was her reality, her partner, her love. The dreams had brought them together, had shown her the man she was meant to find. Now that they were together, her gift turned toward other things, other people who needed guidance or recognition, or simply to see their lives reflected back at them in woven form. In the spring of 1880, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. Dalton's joy was so pure and unrestrained that it brought tears to her eyes. He became impossibly protective, trying to do everything for her, until she finally sat him down and explained that pregnancy was not an illness, and she was perfectly capable of continuing her work. Their son was born in December of that year, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's red hair. They named him Daniel, and Dalton wept openly when the midwife placed the baby in his arms. "I never thought I would have this," he said, looking between his wife and his newborn son. "A family, a home. I never thought I deserved it." "You deserve every happiness," Josephine told him, exhausted but radiant, "and more." Daniel was followed by a daughter 2 years later whom they named Rose, then another son, Thomas, born in 1885. Their house, which had seemed spacious when they first married, grew fuller and louder and more chaotic with each addition. Dalton expanded it twice, adding rooms and a larger kitchen, building a separate studio for Josephine's weaving where she could work undisturbed. The ranch prospered under Dalton's management. He had a gift for horses, for understanding them in the same intuitive way Josephine understood her dreams. He became known across the territory as the man to see for well-trained mounts, and their reputation drew buyers from as far as California. Josephine's tapestries evolved as she did. She began incorporating stories from the Apache and Tohono O'odham peoples who lived near Tucson, weaving their legends with their permission and blessing. She created a series depicting women of the territory, their struggles and triumphs, that was eventually displayed in the new territorial courthouse. But her most treasured tapestry was one she never sold. She wove it in the first year of their marriage, working late into the night when Dalton was sleeping. It showed the two of them, standing together on the porch of their house, the desert stretching out behind them, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against his chest. But if you looked closely, you could see faint images woven into the sky above them, the dust storm where she had first dreamed him, the canyon where he had felt her presence, the moment in the mercantile when their eyes first met. It was the story of how they came together, rendered in thread and color, and it hung in their bedroom where they could see it every morning when they woke. As the years passed, Dalton sometimes asked if she ever regretted leaving Santa Fe, giving up the life she might have had for this hard desert existence. And Josephine would laugh and kiss him and ask how she could possibly regret finding everything she had been searching for. "I dreamed you before I knew you," she would remind him. "The dreams never lie. They showed me where I needed to be, who I needed to find. They brought me to you. And I will thank fate or God or whatever force sent those dreams every day for the rest of my life," he would reply, pulling her close. Their children grew healthy and strong, raised with love and the stories of how their parents came together. Daniel inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's artistic eye. Rose had prophetic dreams of her own, though hers took the form of paintings rather than weavings. Thomas was pure cowboy, happiest in the saddle, but with a gentle heart that made even the wildest horse trust him. In 1892, when Josephine was 36 and Dalton 40, the territory was on the cusp of major changes. The railroad had come to Tucson, bringing with it new people, new ideas, new challenges to the old ways. Their ranch had grown to over 1,000 acres, employing a dozen hands, producing some of the finest horses in Arizona. One evening, sitting on their porch and watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold, Dalton took Josephine's hand. "You remember that first tapestry?" he asked. "The one of me in the dust storm, of course. It is in the house still in the back room. I want to hang it in the main room. I want people to see it, to know how we began." She looked at him curiously. "Why now?" "Because I want our grandchildren to know. When they ask how we met, I want to show them that tapestry and tell them their grandmother dreamed their grandfather into existence. That love can find you in the strangest ways if you are brave enough to follow where it leads." Tears pricked her eyes. "We do not have grandchildren yet." "Not yet. But Daniel is courting the Miller girl, and I think he is serious. And Rose is only 16, but she already has half the young men in town falling over themselves. Give it time. We will have more than enough grandchildren to tell our story to." He was right. Daniel married Elizabeth Miller in 1894 and gave them their first grandson, James, the following year. Rose married a horse buyer from California in 1897, giving them twin granddaughters. Thomas, the baby, surprised them all by falling in love with an Apache woman named Gentle Rain, whose family had been trading with their ranch for years. The marriage caused some talk in town, but Dalton and Josephine supported their son without reservation, and eventually even the most conservative citizens accepted the match. Through it all, the tapestry of the dust storm hung in their main room, and children and grandchildren alike would point to it and ask about the story. And Josephine and Dalton would tell them, taking turns adding details, their voices weaving together as seamlessly as thread on a loom. They told of prophetic dreams and woven visions, of a cowboy who saw himself in cloth and thread, of recognition and connection that transcended normal understanding. They told of courtship and patience, of building a life together from nothing but love and determination. They told of all the years since, the joys and sorrows, the children born and the family created. And always, at the end, Dalton would take Josephine's hand and say, "She dreamed me into existence, and I made those dreams real." In 1903, as the new century found its footing and Arizona moved steadily toward statehood, Dalton and Josephine celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch, 3 generations filling the house and spilling out onto the land. Daniel, now running the day-to-day operations of the ranch, proposed a toast. "To the 2 people who taught us that love is worth following, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. To Ma and Pa, who found each other against all odds and created something beautiful." Glasses were raised, voices joined in celebration. Josephine leaned against Dalton's shoulder, surveying their assembled family with deep satisfaction. This was what her dreams had been leading to all along, not just finding Dalton, but building this legacy of love and connection. That night, after the last guest had departed and the house had finally quieted, they lay in their bed and looked at the tapestry of their beginning. "You still dream?" Dalton asked, as he had asked countless times over the years. "Sometimes," Josephine said. "Less often now. I think the gift is fading as I age, but it does not matter. I have everything I need right here. No regrets, not a single one. You," he pulled her closer, kissing her forehead as he had done thousands of times before. "How could I have regrets? You gave me everything I never knew I needed. A home, a family, a reason to stop running and start building. You gave me myself." They drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped around each other, the tapestry of their first meeting watching over them in the darkness. Josephine dreamed that night for the first time in months. She saw an old woman and an old man, holding hands on a porch, their faces lined with years but their eyes still full of love. She saw grandchildren and great-grandchildren playing in the yard, horses running in the pasture, tapestries hanging on every wall telling stories of dreams and visions and lives well lived. She saw herself and Dalton as they would be, as they were becoming, growing old together with grace and gratitude. And when she woke in the morning, she did not weave the vision. She did not need to. She was already living it, already making it real, one day at a time. The years continued their steady march. Daniel's son James grew old enough to help on the ranch, showing the same gift with horses his grandfather possessed. Rose's twins became talented artists, one a painter like their mother, one a weaver like their grandmother. Thomas and Gentle Rain had 4 children who moved easily between Apache and white worlds, bridge builders in a time of tension and change. In 1912, when Arizona finally achieved statehood, Dalton and Josephine attended the celebration in Tucson. They were in their 50s now, silver threading through their hair, lines marking their faces, but still clearly devoted to each other in a way that made younger couples smile. "We have seen so much change," Josephine marveled, watching the festivities. "When I first came here, Tucson was barely more than a large town. Now look at it." "Change is inevitable," Dalton said, "but some things stay constant like this." He squeezed her hand. Like us, she agreed. They returned to the ranch that evening, content in their routines and rituals. Josephine no longer wove as frequently as she once had. Her hands had developed arthritis that made the fine work difficult, but she still created pieces for family occasions, for weddings and births and celebrations. Dalton still worked with the horses, though he left the hardest physical labor to younger men. He spent his days training and consulting, sharing decades of accumulated knowledge with a new generation of horsemen. He had become something of a legend himself, the cowboy who had settled down and built an empire, and people sought his advice from across the state. But his greatest joy was still coming home to Josephine each evening, sitting on their porch together as the sun set, her hand in his. Their lives intertwined so completely that neither could imagine existing separately. In 1918, when they had been married 35 years, tragedy struck. Thomas was thrown from a green horse and broke his neck, dying instantly. The loss devastated them all, but especially Dalton, who blamed himself for not being there, for not preventing the accident. Josephine held him through his grief, as he had held her through various sorrows over the years. She reminded him that death was part of life, that they had been blessed with far more joy than sorrow, that Thomas had died doing what he loved. Gentle Rain and her children moved back to the main ranch house, and Josephine and Dalton helped raise Thomas's grandchildren, ensuring that his legacy lived on. The pain never fully faded, but it mellowed with time into a bittersweet ache, a reminder of how precious and fragile life could be. That experience made them both more determined to cherish each day they had together. They took walks every evening, weather permitting, just the two of them wandering the land they had built a life on. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing silence as comfortably as words. "Do you know what I think about sometimes?" Dalton asked one evening when they were both in their mid-60s. "What?" "That moment in the Mercantile, when I first saw your tapestry, how my whole life changed in that instant." "Mine too," Josephine said. "Though I think mine started changing the first night I dreamed you." "You think the dreams were fate, that we were always meant to find each other?" She considered this. "I think the dreams showed possibilities, pathways, but we still had to choose to walk them. You could have dismissed the tapestry as coincidence. I could have refused to tell you about the second dream. We could have been too afraid or too practical to follow where this led. But we did follow, because it felt right. Because even when it seemed impossible or too fast or too strange, we recognized something true in it." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Even in their 60s, even after decades of marriage, the way he looked at her could still make her heart race. "I would choose you again," he said simply. "In every life, in every dream, in every possibility, I would always choose you. And I you," she whispered, reaching up to touch his weathered face. "Always you." They kissed there in the fading light, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and had built something lasting and true. As they aged further into their 70s, their children increasingly took over the running of the ranch and Josephine's remaining tapestry business. Daniel was in his 50s now, a grandfather himself, managing the operation with skill and wisdom. Rose had moved back to Arizona after her husband died, bringing her artistic talents home. Thomas's children, all grown now, worked various aspects of the ranch and the horse breeding program. Dalton and Josephine had effectively retired, though neither would have used that word. They simply moved more slowly, rested more often, let younger people handle the hard physical labor. But they were still very much the heart of the family, the foundation everything else was built on. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, the entire extended family gathered for a massive celebration. There were over 40 people present: children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the families that had married into theirs. The ranch house could not hold them all, so they set up tables in the yard, stringing lanterns for light as the sun set. Daniel stood to speak, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. 50 years ago, our parents took a leap of faith. They built a marriage on dreams and visions, on recognition and trust. They built this ranch, this family, this legacy. Everything we have, everything we are, started with them. So please raise your glasses to Dalton and Josephine Lawson, the best parents and grandparents anyone could ask for. The toast was echoed by dozens of voices. Dalton pulled Josephine to her feet, both of them overwhelmed by the sea of beloved faces surrounding them. "I am not much for speeches," Dalton said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I want you all to know that your grandmother here is the bravest person I have ever met. She followed her dreams across the territory to a place she had never been, looking for something she could not name. And she found me, a rough cowboy with nothing to offer but a good horse and a willing heart. She made me better than I ever thought I could be. She gave me all of you. So when you thank me for building this place, remember that none of it would exist without her." Josephine wiped tears from her eyes. "We built it together. That is what marriage is, what family is. Building something together, piece by piece, day by day, until you look around and realize you have created something bigger than yourself. We could not be more proud of all of you, of the lives you are living, of the love you are spreading into the world." The celebration continued long into the night, filled with music and dancing and storytelling. The youngest great-grandchildren fell asleep in their parents' arms, while the older ones begged for tales of the old days, of how Tucson used to be, of cattle drives and prophetic dreams, and a cowboy who saw himself in woven thread. Later, when they were finally alone in their bedroom, Dalton and Josephine looked at the original tapestry that had brought them together. It had faded slightly over the decades, the colors not quite as vivid as they had once been. But it still captured that moment perfectly: the dust storm, the reaching hand, the sense of searching for something just beyond vision. "You think we would have found each other anyway?" Josephine asked, a question she had pondered over the years. "Without the dreams?" "I do not know," Dalton admitted. Maybe our souls would have recognized each other regardless, but I am grateful we did not have to test that theory. I am grateful for every moment we have had from that first meeting to this one right now." She leaned her head on his shoulder, both of them studying the tapestry in the lamplight. "I stopped having prophetic dreams years ago. Did you know that?" I suspected. "You have not mentioned them in a long time. I think the gift served its purpose. It brought me to you, helped me understand the power of following intuition. Once that lesson was learned, I did not need it anymore. My life became my dream come true." He wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "You are a poet as well as a weaver. I am an old woman in love with an old man. The best kind of woman, the best kind of love." They prepared for bed with the easy familiarity of 5 decades together, each knowing the other's routines and preferences without thought. When they finally lay down, Josephine in the curve of Dalton's body as she had been thousands of nights before, she felt such profound contentment that it was almost painful. "I need you to promise me something," she said into the darkness. "Anything. When one of us goes and we both know it will be sooner rather than later, now the other has to keep living. Keep being part of the family. Do not give up. That is a hard promise to make, but necessary. We have built something too important to let it fall apart. Promise me." His arms tightened around her. "I promise, though I cannot imagine this world without you in it." "You will not have to imagine for a long time yet," she said firmly. "We still have years ahead of us," and they did. 3 more good years, filled with the daily joys of family life and the quiet pleasure of each other's company. Dalton's health began to fail in 1931, his heart growing weaker despite the doctor's best efforts. He spent more time resting, less time with the horses, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Josephine never wavered. One evening in early spring, they sat on their porch watching the sunset as they had done countless times before. The air was sweet with desert flowers, and the mountains were painted in shades of lavender and rose. "I need to tell you something," Dalton said, his voice soft but urgent. "What is it?" "I saw you last night. In a dream. The first dream I've had in years that felt significant. Her heart clenched. What did you see? You weaving, but not a tapestry. You were weaving light, weaving air, weaving the very fabric of existence. And I was there watching you, just as I did when we first met. And I understood that this is what you have been doing all along. Weaving our life together, thread by thread, moment by moment, making real what was only vision. Tears rolled down her cheeks. That is beautiful. I think it was my turn to dream true, to see what you saw all those years ago, the possibility of us, the reality we would build. He took her hand, his grip weaker than it used to be but no less loving. I am not afraid of dying, Josephine, because I know what waits on the other side. I will be there, watching for you, waiting to reach for your hand again like I did in that first tapestry. Do not talk like that, she said, though she knew it was futile. I have to. Because I need you to know that these 53 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. You saved me, Josephine, from loneliness, from bitterness, from a life spent running instead of building. You gave me everything, and you gave me the same. They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, holding hands, storing up the moment against the cold darkness they both knew was coming. Dalton died 2 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep with Josephine beside him. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Arizona ranchers and horse traders, Apache families and town officials, all the people whose lives had been touched by the legendary Cowboy, who had built an empire out of love and hard work. Josephine mourned deeply, but kept her promise. She stayed involved with the family, with the ranch, with life. She even returned to her loom, creating one final tapestry that took her 6 months to complete. It showed her and Dalton young again, standing in the Tucson street outside the Mercantile where they had first met, reaching toward each other across the impossible distance that dreams had bridged. She called it making dreams real, and it hung in the ranch house for all to see. But she did not weave again after that. She spent her remaining time with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories, sharing wisdom, ensuring that the legacy she and Dalton had built would continue. On a warm evening in June of 1935, Josephine sat on her porch and felt a familiar presence beside her. She could not see him, but she knew Dalton was there, felt his hand in hers as clearly as she had when he was alive. "I am ready," she whispered to the empty air. "I am ready to come to you now." She died that night peacefully, with a smile on her face. Her children found her the next morning, and though they grieved, they also knew she had lived a full and miraculous life. She had followed her dreams to their ultimate conclusion, had found love and built a family, had woven her visions into reality thread by precious thread. The ranch continued for generations after, always remaining in the family, always carrying forward the legacy of the weaver and the cowboy who had found each other through dreams. The tapestries hung in the house, tangible proof of the power of following intuition, of trusting in vision, of believing that love could bridge any distance. And every sunset, when the desert mountains turned rose and gold, family members would swear they could see 2 figures on the old porch, holding hands, watching the light fade together. Some said it was just tricks of the light. But others, those who believed in dreams and visions and the enduring power of true love, knew better. They knew that some connections transcend death, that some loves are woven so deeply into the fabric of existence that they can never truly end. They knew that somewhere, in a place where dreams and reality merged seamlessly, a weaver was creating tapestries of her dreams and a cowboy was making them real, over and over, forever. And that was the greatest love story ever told, rendered not in thread but in the very substance of life itself. a testament to the power of following your visions, trusting your heart, and reaching across impossible distances to grasp the hand fate offers. It was a story that began in dreams and ended in reality, proving that sometimes the most magical things in life are also the most real, and that true love, once woven, can never be unraveled.